WashingTECH.
Hey, it's Joe, and I don't have to tell you, relationships are critical in Washington. But how do you A, find out who the key players are, and B, figure out how to reach out to them? Well, I want to tell you about Leadership Connect. It's been an absolute lifesaver for us as we expand our operations and outreach here at WashingTECH. Leadership Connect, it's the digital service used by top federal contractors and government affairs leaders to contact decision makers and develop those strategic relationships. Visit leadershipconnect.io and join the community. I love it, and I'm 100% sure you will too. That's leadershipconnect.io. Try it now.
We want to ensure any technology employed by law enforcement is protecting the general privacy of individuals, as well as their constitutional rights to assemble or peacefully protest.
Welcome to the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
The latest tech law and policy news and brightest tech law and policy experts wherever you are.
So you can stay informed, on the move, in less time.
From Washington, D.C., it's the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
With Joe Miller.
Joe Miller.
Social media companies step up moderation of President Trump's controversial statements on their platforms. Elon Musk calls for an Amazon breakup, and the Honorable McKinley Price is my guest on the show today. Hey everybody, despite President Trump's continued claims that Silicon Valley and social media companies in particular harbor anti-conservative bias, social media companies have stepped up their efforts to prevent a repeat performance of the 2016 election, during which misinformation and state-sponsored propaganda ran rampant, often in favor of Trump's presidency, according to the Mueller report and several other sources. On Monday night, after a day of employee virtual walkouts at the company in response to Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg's insistence on leaving up posts that contain misinformation, civil rights leaders met with Zuckerberg via video call, and things did not go so well. Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights President Vinita Gupta, NAACP Legal Defense Fund head Sherilyn Ifill, and Color of Change Executive Director Rashad Robinson issued a statement following the meeting stating that Zuckerberg, quote, did not demonstrate understanding of historic or modern-day voter suppression, and he refuses to acknowledge how Facebook is facilitating Trump's call for violence against protesters. Mark is setting a very dangerous precedent for other voices who would say similar harmful things on Facebook, end quote. Zuckerberg followed up with a company memo on Friday saying the social media giant was again in the process of reviewing its policies related to discussions about police brutality and voter suppression. Before Zuckerberg's announcement, the company had already begun making the public aware of foreign interference on the platform by labeling state-sponsored posts. Following the meeting with the civil rights leaders and Mr. Zuckerberg's announcement, Facebook, citing copyright concerns, removed a campaign video, a Trump campaign video, in which the president appeared to pay tribute to George Floyd. The company cited copyright concerns for taking down the video after it had received complaints from the artist who'd created some of the artwork that was featured in the video. Twitter had also removed that campaign video, which the White House called an illegal escalation. Twitter denied that removing the video was illegal and also cited to the president's use of copyrighted material. Facebook also removed some 200 accounts associated with white supremacy groups last week. The company also removed fake Antifa accounts, according to Reuters. Over at Reddit, some subreddit pages went dark in protest over the company's hate speech policy, which leans heavily in favor of free speech. The protest culminated in Reddit co-founder Alex Ohanian's resignation from the board and calling for his seat to be filled by an African-American board member. Ohanian also indicated that he would be donating $1 million to Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Rights camp and investing future gains on his stock in the black community. Also on Wednesday, Snapchat announced that it would no longer promote President Trump's account due to the president's promotion of violence during protests over the weekend before last. Finally, the Center for Democracy and Technology sued the White House in the D.C. Circuit last week over the president's executive order directing the Independent Federal Communications Commission and Federal Trade Commission to work together along with the Department of Commerce to curtail enforcement of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. The president issued the order after Twitter flagged one of the president's tweets as misleading, and a tweet in which the president criticized California Governor Gavin Newsom's executive order to allow mail-in ballots. Elon Musk took to Twitter calling for a breakup of Amazon, which he labeled a monopoly. The tweet came in response to a tweet by a New York Times reporter who'd written that Amazon had rejected his new book about COVID-19 on the grounds that it didn't meet Amazon's guidelines. Amazon has since stated that it removed the book in error. TikTok pledged to amplify black creators last week amidst criticism that it censored and suppressed content posted by blacks. The company stated that it would form a creator diversity council and a handful of other initiatives to address these concerns. The company also participated in the music industry-led Blackout Tuesday, during which the company shut down its Sounds page. It also announced that it would invest $3 million in organizations that work to address black inequality, although the company didn't mention which organizations it plans to invest in. In a letter to AT&T CEO Randall Stephenson, Senators Ed Markey and Ron Wyden criticized AT&T for zero rating its own content on HBO. Zero rating is the industry jargon used to describe the anti-competitive practice in which carriers count the use of competing platforms against their customers' data limits, but not their own content, in this case HBO, which AT&T acquired in 2018 along with HBO's parent company Warner Media. The senators set a response deadline of June 25th. Video conference platform Zoom announced that it would be introducing end-to-end encryption, but only for paying subscribers. The company says doing so will allow it to work with the FBI to identify child pornographers and sex traffickers. However, Zoom made no reference to any evidence correlating free usership to the distribution of illegal content at a rate that exceeds that of paid subscribers. The California Assembly is now considering a bill that would allow the state of California to conduct surveillance using facial recognition technology if it gives notice ahead of time. The American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California is opposing the measure on the grounds that it undercuts limitations on the use of facial recognition technology, which are already in place in some local areas, including San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley. Finally, Tommy McClay, a former police officer in Denver, lost his job last week after he posed with two other cops for an Instagram photo for which he wrote, "Let's start a riot." That night, Denver police used tear gas and foam bullets against protesters, according to Ars Technica. The Denver Police Department fired McClay for the post. McClay was a brand new recruit, just 9 months out of the police academy, and so still subject to the initial probationary period of his tenure there. But one civil rights leader in Denver told Ars that the Denver Police Department has a high rate of rehiring officers who were previously fired. You can find links to all of these stories in the show notes. Stay with us.
Podcast, the inclusive voice of tech policy.
My guest today is Dr. McKinley Price, president of the African American Mayors Association and mayor of Newport News, Virginia. A prominent dentist in Newport News, Dr. Price earned his Doctor of Dental Surgery from Howard and completed his residency at Provident Hospital in Baltimore. Dr. Price has received numerous honors and awards. Dr. Price is a member of the First Church of Newport News Baptist, a church his great-great-grandfather founded in 1864. Recognizing the church on the floor of the House in 2014 in commemoration of its 150th anniversary, Congressman Bobby Scott noted that Dr. McKinley's great-great-grandfather founded the church prior to the incorporation of the city itself, Newport News, during Reconstruction. His daughter, Marcia Simone Price, serves in the Virginia House of Delegates. McKinley Price. We've seen the toll that COVID-19 has had on black communities in Virginia. African Americans comprise 19% of the population compared to 24% of COVID-19 related deaths. In the U.S. overall, the rate is 25% of all deaths, with African Americans making up just 13% of the population. That's according to the nonpartisan American Public Media Research Lab, What are your thoughts, Mayor Price, overall on this pandemic, and how are mayors around the country responding, and whom you've talked to, and how is it affecting Newport News in particular?
In my capacity as president of the African American Mayors Association, we're working to combat the health and economic impacts that COVID-19 is having on our community. So we have advocated on the federal level for support for cities and the African American community. And some examples of that are things that we've done thus far. On March the 24th, the AAMA members submitted a letter to congressional leaders, and we were requesting immediate passage of the CARES Act 1 with specific protections for the African American community. So in this letter, we also asked for $250 billion in direct funding for cities of all sizes, a federal moratorium on utility disconnections, a federal moratorium on evictions, and also supplemental funding for historically Black colleges and universities. And lastly, in that letter, we asked for federal coordination of PPE so that we wouldn't be competing to purchase this equipment. Now, as far as affirmative action for federal contracts, on April 23rd, the African American Mayors Association members, we submitted a letter to the U.S. Department of Labor, specifically to Eugene Scalia, requesting immediate reinstatement of the affirmative action guidelines for federal contracts that were waived by him through June of this year. As far as racial data, also on April 3rd, AAMA joined with other civil rights groups, including Policy Link, NAACP, National Birth Equity Collaborative, and others in writing a letter to the CDC and the U.S. Surgeon General for release of COVID-19 data related to race, ethnicity, and other factors. And since that letter, the CDC and the HHS has begun to implement these measures. As far as racial and supply chain data and funding for HBCUs, on April 16th, AAMA members, including the mayor from Atlanta, Keisha Bottoms, and Mayor Muriel Bowser from DC, together with We Must Count Coalition, we submitted a letter to President Trump requesting that the administration urge states and state health departments also to report racial data related to COVID-19. This letter also requested additional funding to HBCUs to conduct studies on public health disparities related to COVID-19. So as you can see, while there was no, comprehensive leadership federally, at this time in my city, what we're doing is I've supported outreach of mobile services for the homeless community. A majority of them are people of color or Black as well. And our team is providing services in the field. They deliver food, supplies. We also established mobile showers and laundry services. And we're also offering mobile testing to the homeless people and folks in low-income neighborhoods. There are a couple of other examples. Like in Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot created the Racial Equity Rapid Response Team. And in Houston, Mayor Sylvester Turner is helping bringing COVID-19 testing to underserved communities of color by establishing mobile testing as well. So, while we're struggling with the pandemic, we're also facing staggering unemployment rate. Millions are out of work and businesses have been, forced to close. So I've spoken with some of my fellow mayors, and we're all trying to be creative in how we address this unemployment and lend support to our business community. Right here in Newport News, as you asked, we opened a facility called Brooks Crossing Innovation and Opportunity Center. Now, this innovation facility is the first of its kind in the country, as it blends the industry, higher education with STEM instruction, workforce development, and city supports. We had to temporarily close it, but we're still remotely carrying on services. And lastly, our community is facing challenges, I think, from all fronts on COVID-19 pandemic. And mayors and governors, we're just going to have to take the lead, especially in the absence of federal leadership.
So another consequence of COVID-19 is the effect that it's had, as you alluded to, with the STEM program you just started, or that you've continued to fund, and that's the effect on education. The National Center for Education Statistics reports that some 14% of children nationwide lack access to broadband at home, making it impossible for some 9 million kids to complete assignments remotely. What are some of the disparities you're seeing, Mayor Price, in Newport News, and how has the public school system responded there?
Well, for at-home learning to be successful, young people must have access to not just technology, but they also have to have broadband access. And according to the study by Pew Research Center, school-age children are most affected by lack of ubiquitous access, with 35% of these households without broadband service. So with a disproportionate number of school-age children lacking home broadband access, the breadth of the U.S. digital divide has been revealed as schools substitute in-school resources with online instruction, electronic libraries, streaming videos, and other online tutorials due to the COVID-19. Now, here in Newport News, according to our newspaper, the Daily Press, 43% of Newport News households and 26% of those in our neighboring city of Hampton did not have access to broadband internet, even though we have the infrastructure to connect these homes that exist throughout the cities. So a large number of our areas that lack broadband are places where African Americans and people of color reside. In Virginia, our public schools and our colleges closed in March, and our students transitioned to online learning. Our public schools were able to, loan laptops. We also loaned some hotspots to middle and high school students, but the supply just didn't meet the demand, so we were unable to offer anything to our elementary school students. We were, however, able to supplement using technology with our city's library system, but still, it wasn't enough. So the pandemic has truly illustrated our city's need for additional investments in technology and the infrastructure needed so that students of all ages and backgrounds are not hindered by the lack of accessibility. Now, this issue isn't just affecting my city. In speaking to fellow mayors, it's a crisis many of us are working on to address.
And for September, are you optimistic about the plan for September if schools are going to be closed when school starts back up?
Well, there's a national discussion taking place on how to safely reopen K-12 schools in the fall, as well as what we're going to do with our colleges, our universities, and our trade schools. Newport News is home of Christopher Newport University. In our areas also, we have two dynamic other higher institutions, Hampton University and William and Mary. In talking to the superintendent and a couple of the college presidents, right now it's kind of up in the air. There'll probably be a mixture. Those who wish to come back, they will try and accommodate. Those who wish not to come back will probably have in-home capability. But the superintendent, as far as K through 12, he emphasized that there's probably more of a need for the younger group. So they're going to try and do what they can for the early childhood and younger kids to make sure that they are there and maybe do remote learning for others. So it'll be a mixture.
I hope so. I mean, these poor kids, there are barriers to begin with, in the planning process. No one even accounted for a pandemic. So it just piles on. But in any case, I'm here with Newport News, Virginia's mayor, the Honorable McKinley Price. We're discussing this key moment in Black lives here in the U.S. with the devastating toll the COVID-19 pandemic has had on Black communities and worldwide, as protests across the world ignited by the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the hands of 4 police officers who have now been charged. Breonna Taylor and so many others say their names. We'll be back after a 60-second moment of silence and peaceful protest. Stay with us. turn to surveillance. How are your office and the Newport News Police Department approaching and thinking about surveillance and facial recognition technology in particular? Because obviously folks need space to protest, but there are, I would suspect, I'm not a government official, but I would suspect that there are security concerns from, especially from folks outside the protests. How are mayors thinking about this from what you've gleaned in the course of your discussions?
Well, in Newport News, and as I speak to other mayors, we find ourselves kind of closely watching and learning more about the risk and rewards of using facial recognition and other surveillance technologies, especially as they evolve. Innovation brings an opportunity for law enforcement to do their jobs more efficiently and limit unnecessary interactions between law enforcement and officers and citizens. And this is especially important in this era of COVID-19. However, as with any measure employed by law enforcement, we need to make sure that such tools are error-free and do not unfairly target African Americans or any other group. So in regard to surveillance generally, we want to ensure any technology employed by law enforcement is protecting the general privacy of individuals, as well as their constitutional rights to assemble or peacefully protest. This is extraordinarily important as our photos are available on social media platforms, and these same platforms are used by organizers to advance social justice causes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Mayor Price. It was an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What are some final ideas you'd like to leave with us before we close? And what's the best way for folks to reach out to your office?
It is a trying time for our communities. We're dealing with dual threats of COVID-19 and ongoing racial injustice. Therefore, it is imperative that we all come together, mayors, tech leaders, community leaders, to ensure we are charting an equitable path forward for our communities. So in order to reach me, you can reach me at president@aama.org or follow me on Twitter at nnmayorpricedds. And you can also check out the AAMA website to learn more about what Black mayors are doing across the country at www.ourmayors.org. and on Twitter and Instagram at Our Mayors.
The Honorable Mayor of Newport News, Virginia, and President of the African American Mayors Association, Dr. McKinley Price. Mayor Price, thanks for joining me.
Thank you again, sir.
That concludes episode 233 of the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what we do here, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment, head over to Apple Podcasts, give it a review. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Stay safe and healthy. Take care.
WashingTECH.